Welcome to Echo No More, clear, credible, court-ready documentation in high-conflict parenting. No hype, no legal jargon, no drama. I'm Dr. James. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through this system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their job easier. They told me it protected my credibility. And they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this. Not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. Welcome back to the Court Documentation Podcast. I'm Dr. Carolina James, and today we are talking about something that almost every parent finds stressful. Handing your documentation to your attorney. Because let's be honest, by the time you're sharing documentation with a lawyer, you've probably spent weeks, months, or even years collecting it. You've saved emails, text messages, school records, medical records, incident logs, calendars, photos, screenshots. You have folders full of information. And then comes the moment when you need to hand it over. And suddenly, the anxiety starts. Am I giving them too much? Am I giving them too little? Will they think I'm overreacting? Will they actually read this? Did I miss something important? I understand those questions because I've asked them myself more than once. In fact, one of the biggest lessons I've learned throughout my own legal journey, whether it involved family court, school advocacy, or employment matters, is that parents and attorneys think very differently. And until you understand the difference, the handoff process can feel incredibly frustrating. Parents think in experiences. Attorneys think in strategy. Parents live the story. Attorneys evaluate the case. Those are not the same thing. I remember one of the first times I handed a large amount of documentation to an attorney. I was emotionally attached to every piece of it. Every email represented something. Every incident mattered. Every communication felt important. I had lived it. I had felt it. I had carried it. And then something surprising happened. The attorney didn't focus on many of the things I thought were most important. Instead, they started asking completely different questions. What pattern does this show? How often did it happen? Can we corroborate it? Was it legally relevant? What can actually be used? At first, I found that frustrating because I was looking at experiences. They were looking at strategy. But eventually, I realized something important. My attorney's job was not to feel what I felt. Their job was to use what I had documented, and those are very different things. One of the biggest mistakes parents make when handing documentation to an attorney is assuming the attorney needs the entire story immediately. Most don't. What they need first is orientation. When an attorney opens your documentation, the first question they're asking isn't who's right. It isn't who's telling the truth. It isn't how terrible was this experience. The first question is usually much simpler. What am I looking at? That's it. What is this? How is it organized? What am I supposed to focus on? What matters most? The faster they can answer those questions, the more effective your documentation becomes. This is one of the reasons I've become such a strong advocate for summaries, because summaries create orientation. They help your attorney understand the landscape before they start digging into details. Think about it this way. If someone dropped you into the middle of a city you've never visited before, What would you want first? A detailed list of every street or a map? Most people want the map. The summary is the map. The supporting documentation is the street-level detail. Both matter, but one comes first. Another thing I wish more parents understood is that attorneys are supposed to filter information. That's part of their job. And honestly, this can be emotionally difficult to accept because many parents hand over documentation believing everything should be used. When the attorney only uses part of it, it can feel personal. I've seen parents immediately assume they don't believe me, they don't think it matters, they don't understand. Usually, none of those things are true. Attorneys are constantly balancing competing priorities. Strength versus risk, relevance versus distraction, impact versus volume. Just because something matters to you doesn't necessarily mean it advances the legal strategy, assuming you have one. That doesn't make it unimportant, it just makes it strategic. One of the most valuable shifts I made was learning to separate documentation from advocacy. My job was to document. My attorney's job was to decide what to do with it. Those are different responsibilities. And once I accepted that, collaboration became much easier too. Another common mistake I see parents make is trying to verbally explain everything while handing over documentation. Again, I understand why. You're worried they'll miss something. You're worried they'll misunderstand. You're worried context will be lost. So you start talking and talking and talking. I've done this myself, and here's what I learned. If your documentation requires a 20-minute explanation before someone can understand it, the documentation probably isn't ready yet. Good documentation should orient the reader before you say a word. That doesn't mean you never provide context, of course you do, but the documentation should stand on its own first. The conversation comes second, not the other way around. So let's talk about something harder. Emotion. Because handing over documentation can be emotional, sometimes intensely emotional. I've had moments reviewing records where I felt angry, heartbroken, overwhelmed, exhausted. Sometimes reading old records brings everything back, and that's normal. But one of the most important lessons I've learned is that attorneys are not therapists. Their role is different. When we hand over documentation, we are handing over a tool, a legal tool. And while emotions are absolutely valid, they can sometimes unintentionally shift the focus away from strategy. I often tell parents, feel everything. Just choose the right container for it. Process with your therapist, process with trusted friends, process with your support system. Then bring your attorney the information they need to do their job. That distinction matters. One thing that transformed how I approached documentation was changing a single phrase in my head. I stopped thinking, this proves everything, and started thinking, this shows a pattern. That sounds small, but it's huge. Attorneys are naturally cautious. They are trained to be cautious. Courts are cautious. Judges are cautious. Patterns are often stronger than proof because patterns don't require certainty. They require consistency. And consistency is where documentation shines. Another question I get all the time is, when should I send documentation? The answer is usually not every time something happens. I know that's tempting, especially when things are active. But strategic updates are generally more effective than constant updates. Think in terms of a significant change, an emerging pattern, an approaching hearing, a major development, not every single event. Your attorney needs signal, not noise. And finally, I want to talk about something that many parents misinterpret. Sometimes an attorney will tell you to document differently or stop documenting something altogether. Parents often hear that as criticism. I don't. I hear it as calibration. Because when an attorney starts refining how you're documenting, they're engaging with your documentation. They're taking it seriously. They're helping align your efforts with legal strategy. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Before I finish, I want to leave you with this. After years of documentation, legal proceedings, attorney meetings, and helping other parents build court-ready records, I've realized something simple. The best documentation doesn't make an attorney work harder. It makes their job easier. When attorneys compliment documentation, they rarely mean this was emotional, this was persuasive, this was dramatic. What they usually mean is it was organized, it was clear, it showed patterns, it stayed within its lane, it didn't require defending. That's the standard. Not perfection, not volume, not persuasion, usability. Because ultimately, your attorney does not need to experience your story the way you experienced it. They need to be able to use it. And when they can, your documentation begins doing exactly what it was designed to do: carry weight without creating noise. This week's action step is simple again. Look at the documentation you would hand an attorney today. Ask yourself, would this help someone understand the situation quickly, or would it require me to explain everything first? If the answer is the second one, start with the summary. Because clarity is one of the greatest gifts you can give both your attorney and yourself. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Court Documentation Podcast. Until next time, remember, your job is not to convince your attorney. Your job is to equip them. Before we close, I want to remind you of something important. You don't need to document everything. You don't need to be perfect. And you don't need to convince anyone with emotion. Calm documentation is power. If this episode helped you, you will find a full structured system in my guide, Clear, Credible, Court Ready. It's designed to support, not replace, your attorney. And if you want help turning everything you're documenting into something organized and usable, you can visit www.economocoaching.org to download my guide on how to create a clear, court-ready documentation binder. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you next week.